Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to another episode of our path, finding our path towards the Kodesh Baruch Hu, to serving Hashem, to fulfilling our purpose in this world. We're in Mesilas Yesharim, path of the just by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. We're starting tonight chapter 14, Perek Yud Daled. We're in the section of the book, the second half of the book, which talks about precious. Precious literally means separation. It's a section of the book that deals with those things that somebody who is capable of rising above the norm should be doing, or at least trying to aspire to be doing those things. And we spoke last week and the week before about a couple of points. One point was there's a precious which is desirable and expected, a separation, a level of making things forbidden for yourself, which the general populace, general Jewish population are allowed to do. What is a good form of this separation, a bad form? And we said last week, anything which endangers your health, which is extreme in any way, is certainly not what we're talking about here. The second question we dealt with was why, if precious is something which is separation, is something which is so desirable and brings us much closer to Hashem, makes us less physical, makes us more spiritual. So why didn't Chazal make it mandatory on all of Klal Yisrael? And the general principle is that Chazal were dealing with what everybody can do, not what some people should do. And to make something mandatory in a situation where not everybody will be able to achieve that is counterproductive, because what happens is that people will just throw up their hands and go, the rabbis, the Torah expects too much of me, I can't do any of this, and just give up completely. As I think I mentioned last week, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein refused to prohibit smoking cigarettes even after there was conclusive proof that it led to lung cancer, heart disease, and a host of other nasty things. And they came to him and he said, no, I'm not going to make it also. Why? Because, there are people who are addicted and they won't be able to give it up. And so what have I done? I've just broken the power, I've lessened the power of the Rabbonim. So I'm not going to do that. Anyway, last week we spoke about these ideas. We're going to move on now to chapter 14, which really talks in more specifically about the three divisions, the chalakim, the chelkei haprecious. The Mesilas Yesharim is going to divide up the concept of precious, of separation, into three specific areas. They are as follows. Hanois, pleasures, precious, separating oneself from physical pleasure. Again, precious, the idea is to drawing back within which is permitted, to make things on a personal level for yourself, things that you don't do. Precious when it comes to dinim, which really means being more strict, and we'll come to that in terms of halacha, drawing back within that which is permitted, to make things which are permitted to everybody not permitted for you. And precious ba minhagim. We'll see what that means. And minhagim means really basically conduct. The way one behaves, the one acts and comports himself. So specifically, aprecious ba'anois. We spoke in the previous chapters about taking from the world, and this is the really idea of precious, that which is strictly necessary for him. Strictly speaking, excuse the pun, Chazal did not osser anything which is not, for example, a person theoretically could eat as much steak tartare as he wanted to, if you like steak tartare. He could dine in the finest restaurants, provided they're all kosher. The idea is, though, that the nature of physicality tends to make a person more physical and more prone to eventually coming to transgress the Torah. And so the idea is that a person should really, the physical world is really like a resource, or it's a bit like an atom. An atom can light a city. Atomic power is cheap and it's clean. And I'm not going to say it's the best available energy, but it certainly beats fossil fuel by a long way. It's extremely powerful, but an atom can light a city and it can burn a city. anything which has a lot of power in it can go one way or the other. And so even though physical pleasure, and in some circumstances he's going to say is mandated, Shabbos is a mitzvah to have Shabbos, Oinig Shabbos. But the nature of somebody who is porish, somebody who wants to be on that higher level, will be careful to take from the world only those things which he strictly needs. Now, of course, it's very difficult when it comes to yourself to decide what you strictly need. It's very easy, as we said last week, to confuse wants with needs. Rabbi, I need this. So again, as we said last week, the old dictum, the basic dictum that Chazal teaches is, make yourself, find yourself a rabbi, and acquire for yourself a friend, because other people don't have your problem, your negias, your biases when it comes to you. So they can be objective, and it's a very good idea to speak to somebody who knows you well and who has das Torah to say, should I do this particular area of being more abstinent than normal, than other people, if you want to do that? Is this something which is fit for me? Is this something I can do? Is this something I should be doing? And so that's very important. That is, as we said, he says that when we're talking about hana, that's anything which provides pleasure to any one of the senses, whether the pleasure is through food, through relations, through clothing, through a tiulim, going for traveling, holidays, conversation, or anything like this, any similar means where there is an idea of hana. Of course, conversation is a more abstract hana. But again, how much, he's going to be speaking about this later on, how much do you need to talk? How much do you need to be involved in the company of other people is also speaking about, which of course is pleasurable. So these are the areas, again, the areas where a person should examine: the pleasure of food, the pleasure of cohabitation. Of course, we're talking about married people. Clothing, wearing nice clothes. To what extent do you need to? Of course, a person always has to be clean. He has to dress in a respectable fashion. I'm not sure he has to buy Armani suits, or was that one of these people? I'm not sure that he has to go for lengthy tiulim all over the world. I'm not sure he has to spend a lot of time schmoozing. Schmoozing in itself is very dangerous because it often leads to sometimes nivel peh, or questionable jokes, or lashon hara, speaking ill about somebody. That's the first area of precious. Hana, pleasure. The second area of precious, these three divisions, is when it comes to dinim. For example, in the Gemara, very often in halacha, there'll be a machlokas, and how do you say machlokas in English? A halachic dispute. A dispute as to what the halacha is. And we have a system where we paskin, we make a halachic decision, but that doesn't mean that the other opinion doesn't exist. A person who wants to be stringent with himself could, and say, okay, I know it's a machlokas, and I understand, that this is the halacha, but I want to take upon myself to go a little bit more machmir, a little bit more stringent. A good example of this is things like ribis. The laws of ribis are very complicated, and I don't want to get myself into deep water here, but there's a lot of opinions that would say that the way the current banking system is set up in Eretz Yisrael, especially, could be problematic. I'm not saying the idea of credit cards could be problematic. I'm not saying don't use credit cards. Certainly a person, wherever possible, if he has an account, should never let it go into the red in this country. Should always make sure it's in the green. But, okay, I don't want to go into too many details because these are complicated and halachic matters. But there are opinions. There are certain areas where, let's say, the leniency or the psak is not as strong, let's say, as in other areas. that's another area. I was just going through another area of leniency. For example, if you've ever learned through the Gemara in Eruvin and really gone into that in some detail, a lot of what we accept as, again, I don't want to get myself into problems here, a lot of Eruvin are, by some opinions, things which are, I don't want to say borderline, but put it this way, if you learn through Eruvin deeply, I know many people who have learned through Eruvin and come to not rely on many of the Eruvin that exist. And again, I'm not naming names, I'm not saying where I'm talking about, but there are, obviously there are very good Eruvin, but there are certain areas where Eruvin are maybe, I don't want to say b'di'evid again, I'm just saying that there are areas where, for sure, a person who wants to make an effort to be careful to fulfill every opinion, or let's say maybe probably only two opinions, or could be more opinions. That's the idea of precious. The idea is to make sure that you're observing both sides of a halachic dispute. When obviously that usually makes life more difficult for you. Now, Chazal already explained for us in Chulin, the Maimer of Yechezkel, Hinei, Nafshi lo matumo'o, shelo ochalti mibehema shahoira bam chochem velo ochalti mibasa kus. Interesting. He said, my soul was not polluted, meaning I did not eat from an animal about a chochem, a rabbi had to make a judgment call. Very often when it comes to shechita, you know, you have a large animal. Shechita requires a lot of expertise. A large animal, I'm guessing now, could probably worth $5,000-$10,000. A cow, a prize cow, a good steak. So there's a lot riding on it, and you know, sometimes there are questions. Now, of course, we have competent halachic authorities who will paskin, this is okay. Even in a situation, without going into details, where there may be an opinion, a more machmir, more stringent opinion, to say that it's not okay. So this is what Yechezkel is talking about. My soul was not polluted. Obviously, he didn't eat something that was treif. Meaning, I never ate from an animal about which there was a shaila. And even if the shaila, the question, the answer returned, it's okay, it's kosher. But I never ate from such an animal. And he also said, I did not eat from the flesh of an animal that had to be shechted quickly. And though me'ika hadin, the essence of the law, it's permitted, but he was machmi, he was stringent with himself. So, as we said, he says here, Ukava zachati lamala she'ein lilmod mimasha huta al kol Yisrael. Somebody who wants to practice precious isn't guided by something what's permitted to all of Klal Yisrael, all of the Jewish people, but he has to withdraw himself from what is repulsive, from what is similar to it, and from what is similar to what is similar to it. That's the point. The person separates himself not just from the Issa, as all of Klal Yisrael have to do. Being a porish means separating yourself from something which is similar to that, and something which is similar to that thing which is similar. As Ma'ukva says in Chulan, Ona Bahoi Milsa Chola Ba Chamra Legabe Abba. He said, with this regard, I was as vinegar is to wine compared to my father. For he would, if he ate meat on one day, of course we know there's an issa to eat meat and milk together, and the Rabbanan, it's also to eat milk for a certain period of time after eating meat. Could be 6 hours is the most stringent that most people observe nowadays. There's a shita that holds, an opinion that holds 1 hour. There's another opinion less well understood, which is 3 hours. Different minhagim, different customs. Now, Ma'ukva's father would not, if he ate meat on one day, he didn't eat cheese until 24 hours later. Whereas I would not eat cheese at the next meal, which is basically what we do, would do so, would eat at the following the meal after that. Now, of course, you have to say that Ma'ukva, for sure, was not observing the Ikka Hadin, the law itself, the baseline of the law, the line between permitted and forbidden. That cannot possibly be, because if that would be true, then it means that his son, by doing less than that, would be transgressing a mitzvah. Elamai, rather, you have to say that Mar Ukva was pushing the line very, very far in front of him. And his son said that, I'm like vinegar when it comes derived from wine. I'm like a vinegar. My father was wine and I'm like vinegar. Again, we're on whatever level we're on, we have to try and, within that level, to move up.
What was he trying to accomplish with that? What was the concern?
He was being a porish. He wanted to make absolutely sure that there was the meat and the milk didn't come anywhere close together. They didn't. I don't know exactly. This is not a shita that we hold nowadays at all. I don't know anybody who does this. I mean, a certain. There are chumras when it come to waiting, but I don't know anybody who does that. Why he did this? I don't know if we're talking about. He says in the matter of dinim, and it seems I understand your question because we're basically saying what was he choshesh for? What was he concerned about? There was no, to the best of my knowledge, an opinion that says you have to wait 24 hours. Now, it could be there is. I don't know the Gemara well enough. I don't remember when learning Basa B'chol of such a shita. Ma'es la'es, 24 hours. I don't know. Could be there was an opinion like that. I don't know. It's a good question.
I have an idea that it could be there's an opinion or there's a strict opinion out there, but we don't understand its reasoning, and you're trying to be a parish. Do you need to try to hold like that opinion before you understand it?
That's, I mean, if there is an opinion about something, then obviously the opinion is based on something which is learned in the Gemara, which either could be a svara, could be something logical, or it could be a way of learning a posuk, Zeres Kosov. Without getting into details, we don't know. But let's say that there's a halachic opinion which is more strict. So somebody who wants to be a porish will take notice, will take account, will follow that stricter opinion, even though it's not the halacha. That's what he's talking about here. Now you're asking me a good question, because to the best of my knowledge, I don't know anybody who says me'es la'es 24-hour period you have to wait. But it could be just I forgot the Gemara, so that could be the case. And let's leave it at that, because I don't know. Okay, now there's another idea here which is we talked about before, which is precious bimin hogim. So we talked about precious when it comes to hana, separation when it comes to pleasure, physical pleasures of the world, eating, relations, etc., clothing, tiulim, going for walks, going for holidays. Then we talked about precious in dinim. We just spoke about that. The idea, for example, of kashrus or eruvin. He gave two examples. Now there's a third area he spoke about, which is precious b'min hogim. What he means by this is something that's a concept that we've spoken about earlier in Mesilas Yesharim, which is the idea of setting aside time to analyze one's actions, to spend time with oneself and with Hashem. The concept is one which is called hisbodedus. Very often, when a person's in society, he loses, or he can lose, his own voice. He can lose his own track. And so the idea of precious in minhagim is that, of course, a person has to be involved with other people. And there's a Gemara in Ksuvas, which says, La'olam tehei daito shel odem ma'oreves imabrios. A person should always be associated in the company, mixed in, moreves, so not with imabrios, with other people. And it also that says in Tainus, cherev el badim v'noalu, a sword upon those who scheme and are undone. That's Yirmiyah. And the Gemara explains in Tainus what does this posuk in Yirmiyah mean. Excuse me. Cherev al sonehem shel talmidei chachamim sheyoshvim bad bavad va'oskim b'Torah. It's a very strong thing. There's a sword should be on those who are, and there's a euphemism here, it says the enemies of Talmidei Chachamim, but of course it really means who isolate themselves and occupy themselves with Torah and don't learn b'chavrusa, or they don't give vadim, or they're... So there's an issa on the one hand to cut yourself off, to be antisocial in situations where that's required. Torah learning, or in business, for example. You have to earn a living. You have to be, to a certain extent, in society. And to not do that, we saw, is considered an issa. However, but, when that area of life has been satisfied, it's preferable to seek your own company. Because by doing that, you are protected from sicha b'teila, unnecessary chatter, schmoozing, gazing, and also not gazing outside your daled amos. This is an interesting concept. A person shouldn't, if possible, look outside his 4 L's, they call it in English. Daled amos is about 6 to 8 feet. Shouldn't look outside his immediate area. Why is that? In fact, I think they tell a story about Yisrael Salanta, that his children could always, I think it was, maybe I'm wrong, but it was his children could always, when they were walking with him, they could always play around and be naughty, provided they did it to the left and right of him. And the reason why, because he never looked outside his daled amos. Now, I think when we're talking about someone like Rav Yisrael Salanta, the idea is that if a person is complete in himself, if he has internal shleimus, he has no need to look outside. The reason why a person wants to gaze outside his daled amos is in some way there is a lacking in him which he needs to fill from the outside. I think we're in a generation now where this has absolutely reached an extreme level where people feel so empty that they grasp at anything outside themselves, all kinds of entertainment, all kinds of shtuyot, all kinds of nonsense, all kinds of Instagrams and YouTubes and whatever it is, to fill the void, to fill that empty space. A person, after he's fulfilled these needs, as we said, should be able to feel complete and satisfied by doing his bodedus, because he finds himself not alone. He finds himself alone with Hashem. And that's the greatest pleasure there can be. Now, of course, this is not for everybody, but I think all of us, and especially in the generation in which we live, this is something which is of tremendous value. And you see in certain kinds of Hasidus, types of Hasidus, stress this idea of hisbodedus. And as an antidote, I think, against the clamor, the shout, as the Gemara says, the kol hamoni Romi, the sound of the multitudes of Rome. Gemara talks about this enormous sound of Rome, that in time of Rome, when Rome was an empire, the enormous noise of and we can transfer that to our own generation now, the tremendous noise of technology, not just the noise of wheels grinding, but the presentation of the culture that we live in, its desire to fill up our minds with this noise, basically, cultural noise. So a person, I think more now, more today than ever, really has to find a way to quite literally turn it off and be with himself, be with Hashem. So he sums up by saying, V'hinei shloshes chalokim. These three divisions have been, we really, it's a very short chapter, we're coming to the end. We boiled it down to three short principles. And that's really the take in man's activities. And really, within those three divisions, he says, it's impossible to set forth all of the particulars within those three categories. But all he's done is basically divided up Precious into three categories. Within those three categories, apart from what he described in terms of pleasures, there are many more pleasures than the pleasures he listed. There are many more ways in terms of dinim, halacha that a person could think about in terms of Precious, and in terms of his hanhoga, his relationship to the outside world. These have to be, he finishes off by saying, these have to be derived by individual judgment. Each one of us is very, very different in terms to the Precious that is required from us and is advisable for us. But the underlying truths are universal, and it requires individual judgment to be able to apply those in each of our lives. Okay, we'll leave it here. Bezrat Hashem, we'll carry on next week, chapter 15, how to acquire Precious.